in actual jobs, you are not required to pay all of these upfront. And that's very important to know there. No fee is charged to you at any time before you are officially taking up the job, before you get an official confirmation. They are out there to steal money. And also, not just your money, but like any personal information which is unique to you. Have a separate email and a separate phone number and never use them for personal purposes. Make sure that you review or research the company as much as possible, especially when somebody is approaching you with an advertisement rather than you finding their advertisement somewhere on a particular website. Hello world, thanks for tuning into Rozgar Radio. This is a new YouTube channel where we'll be sharing best job advice and career strategies. I am Aditya.
And I'm Annie.
And today we all will be learning about job scams. That's our first video, especially how to identify them and protect yourself when you come across one.
So Aditya, can you tell us a bit about what exactly is a job scam?
Sure, that's an important question to answer, Annie. So a job scam is a type of fraud where individuals pose as legitimate or actual employers or recruiters and deceive job seekers with fake job postings, ads, or any form of application where the individuals become targeted and they end up losing money or personal information.
And what would you say is the objective of the scam? What are scammers trying to achieve by trying to trick you?
Yeah, that's an important thing to know. Get into the psyche of the scammers. So, according to me, there are two major objectives. The first one is that they are looking to get some kind of financial benefit out of it. So, in a way, they're defrauding you of either money, which is straight up from your bank accounts, and right now in today's world, UPI scams have become very prevalent. So that is one of the most common ways that they do it. And there is a second objective, which is the the identity part of it, which they are trying to scam. And I think the second part is a little more sensitive and a little less known. So I would like to spend some time there talking about it. When I say stealing your identity, what I mean is that these scammers would often also collect information about you, something which is very sensitive and personal to you. So this can be ranging from anything which is very important, like Aadhaar card, which is unique to you and you should always keep it secret and not share it with anyone, to something which is much more common, like your phone number or bank account number, right? And even though in most occasions we share them with for other purposes in our lives, in these kind of scams, this set of data that which is personal, very unique to you, can be sold off to data brokers. These data brokers are just a fancy term for organizations that are doing business in buying a lot of this data. So imagine there is a person like you who has a bank account, Aadhaar card, and PAN number. And what they will end up doing is they try to buy a lot of these PAN card numbers, Aadhaar card numbers. And the advantage that they have is that they can sell this bulk data to individuals that they need. So these can be, again, companies or who are doing it for legitimate advertising purpose. So a lot of companies nowadays take phone numbers. That's how we get those scam calls. But there might be more shady companies which are actually buying this data to do fraudulent work in the subsequent periods, right? So these fraudulent frauds can be like, again, committing like some other kind of scam with the individuals who already have given their phone number. So it's all that to say is to understand the two key objectives, which is they are out there to steal money, and also not just your money, but like any personal information which is unique to you.
Yeah, that's quite scary to see. Just with some personal information, somebody can steal your entire identity or loot you of all the money that you have in the bank. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, can you tell us a little bit more about how do they actually end up stealing our money and this personal data that you talk about as well? What exactly happens?
So if you think about the process these individuals take, they're often, I categorize them as three major steps. So the first one is they start by preparing these materials, which they have to show an individual like you, who is like, imagine preparing hard to get an entry level job, and now they have to use that as a hook to convince you that the job that they are trying to sell you is actually original. And so the way they do that is by preparing a lot of different materials. One is the job posting itself, right? Like, so the job posting that you see in advertisements or through some form of message that comes to you is designed very carefully to show details which might be official. So for our case, let's imagine like you get a fraudulent job scam from a company called I don't know, Zindabad, and that company is specializing in IT, services, and they are a legitimate company. Like Zindabad is a legitimate company which exists. But what the scammers will do is then copy an actual person who is available on LinkedIn, their details, and personify that, okay, they are the HR's person. They are here on behalf of this Zindabad company to share a job posting which is available for you to take. And so what they're doing in this process is they are trying to sell themselves as a person, and then create job materials which are very relevant to that job, but they are actually fake. And then they will also send you, if you keep on giving into their scam, as the steps progress, they will create other materials like the contract which you have for the job, or official documents that might look official but they are not, and those kind of things. And so that's what I mean by the materials. That is the step one. So they create all of these materials which are very, very they seem like they are trustable, but they are not. The second step is to convince you, just because the materials are there, you will not, like, just because the job posting is there, you will not go and apply for a job. So what they do is they then undertake these different communication strategies, which is also called as social engineering. If you're looking for a more formal term, I would encourage you to look it up. In these communication strategies, the idea is to convince you that these job materials are real, and this company is real, they are real, and there is a very big advantage for you to apply to this job. And they do it using two ways. One, they will either put a lot of pressure on you, saying, "Oh, this is the last job that you are only selected. It has limited time validity," or they will put a lot of positive spin on it. So they will say, "Your profile is the best which stands out. I would highly encourage you. You will never get this opportunity again." Those kind of things. And as you can see, these are very convincing. If who will not want their ego massaged a little bit, right? So that those strategies work for a reason. And the third is the actual attack or the scamming portion, where they convince you enough where you trust them to give details slowly and steadily. And they don't ask you all the details in one step or one go. They might start by asking you your phone number, your email address, and then subsequently, when they gain a little more trust, they start asking you bank details. If they gain more trust, they'll be like, "Oh, we have to send you some materials, for instance. Can you pay upfront or things like that? So in all of those, they are subsequently taking a little more, till the point they have satisfied or extracted the most type, like most amount of information from you. And that's where they close all of these. So you will not be able to contact them again or trace them because they use private communication channels, like it can be Telegram sometimes, or Signal, and essentially encrypted chat messages, where you cannot figure out later on, once you're scammed, that who is that person. And so all this to say that these steps are very careful for you, like very important for you to understand how to be careful about going through these things.
Thank you for sharing that, Aditya. So you mentioned Telegram and Signal apps similar to WhatsApp. What are some other job scam mediums that they use to trick you?
Yeah, so that's a very important question, but at the same time, I think there are a few dimensions I see. So the first one, I would say, let's see from the medium aspect, right? Like, so in terms of medium, there are a couple of ways they do these scams. So one is through emails, where they are reaching out, posing as legitimate employers, or genuinely coming from, for example, TCS or all of these well-known companies. And they will write emails saying you have you have been recruited or you have been selected, and they want you to send few details. That's how these email scams start, and they will require at some point, once they gain trust, to give payments to them, and they are of various forms. So they might say application processing fee, they might say equipment maintenance, that we will be sending you a laptop that we will be sharing with you, all of that, right? In actual jobs, you are not required to pay all of these upfront, and that's very important to know there. No fee is charged to you at any time before you are officially taking up the job, before you get an official confirmation. So that's an important point to keep in mind. That's so email scams are one. The second are like WhatsApp based scams, or any, I would categorize any social media tool based scam, where these individuals will reach out through messages on WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, any messaging platform that you see, and especially Twitter. Twitter is very famous for these kind of scams, not at just entry level, but also at more sophisticated, specialized, you know, jobs, where they kind of do these attacks. The third one is a little easier to distinguish. These are more phone call based scams, where they directly call you up, and they talk about a particular job or a particular position that might be available, and how you are an important candidate for that particular thing. And so these kind of scams often happen on phone, but these are also the most tricky to avoid, because there is a personal touch to it. So they can put pressure through voice, which is much more intimidating than over an email or WhatsApp, where you have some time to think. It's very important to kind of know these types, but at the same time know that it's not just one form that you can see it. And even though I cover these three mediums, there might be new, like, it's always, these scammers are always on lookout for new ways to do it. So always be prepared for that. The other way to look at these is the form of jobs that get these, right? Like different forms of jobs. And in my experience, what I've seen is that most scammers who are doing these job scam do it at entry level. So most of the job scams happen at entry level, where these are work from home jobs. Examples of these jobs would be something like data entry, or transcription, or something like even audio recording, or some kind of task based thing that you have to do from home. And these are very tricky to identify, because even the legitimate jobs in this space are like not very well established companies. So there might be actually companies which are small scale doing this in a legitimate way, but it's very difficult. So it's unfortunate, but the entry level job seekers who are going into, like, for example, call technical support kind of roles or data entry roles have to be much more careful about these job scams than probably someone who is going as a software programmer or a coder, because that's a much more higher specialized job. But that does not mean that those jobs are not experiencing scams. In fact, I'll show you an example where even very well-known journalists have been scammed very significantly, where they have lost both financial information and financial data, their financial assets, and also the information, the personal information that they have. So yeah, so those are the two main ways I would kind of distinguish the scams.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Aditya. I think especially now when we have a lot of hybrid work setup that's happening in work from home opportunities, it sometimes might get difficult to differentiate between a real job and those that are trying to scam you. It is interesting that you shared that it is not just entry level roles that have this challenge, but it is across. Can you share a few tips on how best we can protect ourselves from scams like these?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things, and I think let's break it down by stages. So at each stage, how to protect yourself. Right. So at the stage when you're actually on the lookout for or preparing your own materials or in doing the homework that is required to apply for jobs, there are a couple of things that you can do straight away to protect yourself, but also if something happens, reduce the impact on your. So the first one is always, often, like almost always, I will cannot emphasize this enough, that have a separate email and a separate phone number for job purposes. There is one big reason for this, because if worst case you fall prey to a job scam, because it's not linked to your financial banks, the phone number, it is much more difficult for them to get anything beyond those two things. So they have to work much harder, the scammers, to get information that they would have gotten otherwise from other, like just having your actual bank phone number, OTP number, and the actual email address. And so I would start by suggesting people to kind of have a separate email and a separate phone number and never use them for personal purposes. So only keep them for your work. And one advantage you have is, if you do that, is one, obviously you're keeping your work and personal life separate, but also when you have these kind of scammers approaching you on that, those email and phone numbers, they don't have other information which they use as a starting point. So for example, if they have a phone number of yours, they can at the minimum get your bank details, right? Like, so what bank you might have an account in. They might not know what exactly is the bank number, but they can potentially know few more details because that number has existed for a long period of time. And they will use that as a starting point, saying, hey, I know you are probably X and Y person, this phone number with these details, and we wanted to confirm. And then you're like, oh, this guy probably is legitimate, and then you continue having the interaction. So having a new email and a new phone number is the best way to avoid that. In case, I mean, phone number, taking the SIM is not a problem. It's often what I've seen is people don't have two phones, and in that case, what I would say is either buy a very cheap phone which is not smartphone, because it's almost like a very short way to avoid scams. But worst case, if you don't have, try to put it in your parents' phone or any other phone which has dual SIM, because you are not going to use that on a regular basis, that phone number, for your daily life. So that's the first thing I would, based on the stages, I would say, especially in applying. The second is, apply to legitimate platforms. What I mean by that is there are a lot of job classified services which are available. A lot of these by name. They are famous. For example, LinkedIn, Naukri, all of these are famous. But at the same time, some of them have higher propensity or potential of getting these scam ads. And Naukri is, I would say, ranks higher on these because they have Naukri or even what was the other one? I think it was called monster.com or something. I don't know if it's still available, but like those kind of websites, even though they are legitimate, they don't do a good job of filtering their job classified. So you have a higher potential of those kind of job scams coming in. But ones which I would totally lean towards are something like LinkedIn, which has a better infrastructure to kind of capture that. So make sure that you do some homework to figure out whether the platform is legitimate. Is it how many job scams have happened or kind of come across, right? So you can do a Google search saying Naukri job scams or monster.com job scam and see what people have talked about on social media websites. Do they experience that on a regular basis? And the third one is the kind of details that you mention on your application materials. Try to reduce as much as possible. I often see individuals writing their personal phone number, personal address, all of this information on their resume. It is not required. All you need is an email address and probably a LinkedIn profile. Nothing more than that. And if the employer genuinely wants to contact you, they will not stop just because you don't have any details. The first step they will do is they will email you that they are interested in having a conversation, right? So that way you are protecting how much amount of information is out there for the world to know.
So, to summarize, some tips to ensure we don't fall for scams during the pre application stage. You mentioned one is to avoid sharing too much personal information about ourselves, our address, our personal phone numbers. You also mentioned applying only to legitimate platforms to ensure that organizations you're applying to are genuine. And you mentioned, if possible, to have a separate email address and phone number while we're applying. Now, this was for the pre-application stage. Now, can you tell us a few tips on how during the application we can keep ourselves safe?
Yeah, that's actually super important. So during application phase, most amount of effort for the job seekers go in finding a particular company, looking at their open jobs, classifieds, and trying to find if they fit for that role and then apply for it, right? Like that's a normal workflow, approximate. And I would like to mention couple of key steps there so that you can keep yourself safe while doing it. So the first thing is make sure that you review or research the company as much as possible, especially when somebody is approaching you with an advertisement rather than you finding their advertisement somewhere on a particular website. I'm not saying that the second example, like when you try to do research, like find some classified, it's less, there is no scam. I'm just saying that there is much more likelihood of a scam if somebody is approaching you directly. So be very cautious of that. But also when you are applying, make sure that you are researching the company by going to the website explicitly, seeing what is the URL. So it'll start with as simple as I show you on screen. So this is probably a New York Times article website. And so if you click on your browser, this might be different for different browsers, but you can see if New York Times is reaching out to me for a job or has posted a job, they will do all their communications from nytimes.com because that's their original website. And any employer who is reaching out from NY Times talking to me will have an email address which ends at the rate nytimes.com. Same way we have at the rate gmail.com. So this is one sure short way to know that there is the individual who is reaching out to you, whom you are communicating, is indeed a part of that company. So that's the first step. And how do you figure out if this website, sometimes websites look very deceivingly similar. So for example, how do you know the official website of New York Times is NY Times or newyorktimes.com? There is no way to know. So one, I think probably if they are famous companies, if you type for TCS, you will often get a Wikipedia entry which shows the website that they actually have. So that's the best way to go about it if you're not sure. But on top of it, you have to make sure that when you click on this settings button, you want to confirm if the connection is secure. And when the connection is secure, you have something called HTTPS instead of HTTP. And that is a very important distinction to me. So HTTPS means that this is a secure encrypted connection, just like what you have on WhatsApp or on Telegram. On top of it, the second way to make sure this connection is secure is by clicking on this button, and it will show you a certificate which has been issued, which every website, every employer who has a website has to get to show their legitimacy or that they're genuine employers, or any. In fact, this is not limited to just employers, but like any website which is incorporating, or like in simple words, an encrypted website, but also doing transactions on the website or something on those lines. So they have to get this certificate. And so those are the two key things when you're researching for a job that you should make sure that you know that this is like a legitimate job. And the second one is that is when you're doing research. But then what happens if you're interacting with individuals who claim that they are from that company, right? So you want to make sure that their email address is exactly, if there's someone coming from TCS, it is something hr@tcs.com, and not hr@gmail.com or hrtcs@gmail.com, because never ever TCS will, or any other company will have an email address which will have @gmail.com, outlook.com, yahoo.com, or those kind of personal email addresses. It'll always be their website domain name. So that's a very important distinction. And if you can figure that out, you will realize that most of the job scams have that very distinct feature. But what if the person who is like sending you the thing has just that one portion wrong, but all of the other things match? Like, for example, they have a legitimate profile picture, they have a legitimate signature in the email saying they belong to TCS, they have worked there for so many years. And when you try to Google them, you find their LinkedIn profile which actually says they are of LinkedIn. In that case, I would recommend you to either personally initiate a separate email with that individual, either on LinkedIn or Gmail, or not Gmail, but like over email, to see if that person who they say are genuinely them, right? So that's one way. The second way is, if it's a smaller company, especially for individuals who are an entry-level job, if a smaller company is reaching out to you, they almost always have their phone number on their websites, the official website. And what you want to do is call them up and ask more details about the person who has reached out to you. Give them those details and see if they are indeed working in the same company. But by now you would have, I think, Annie, realized the pattern that most of the times it's just verifying information in multiple ways to make sure that it's legitimate before taking an action. Because worst case, if you don't take action, there's another job anyways waiting out for you. because there are like different other jobs like from legitimate companies you can apply to. But if you end up applying to these fake scam websites, you will end up losing a lot of financial data, but also your information. So it's very, if you have a doubt, always try to not apply to a job unless you make a definite decision and not do it on urgency.
Thank you so much for those helpful tips, Aditya. Can you also take us through one example when you mentioned previously about a reporter being scammed? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think before our conversation, I was talking about this particular New York Times article, and I thought this is a good piece to walk through. So this piece talks about how a couple of high-profile, well-known journalists were scammed around different job opportunities, and mind you, these are very famous, well-known, reputed journalists. And so I wanted to walk through this article for a couple of reasons. One, talk to you about how everyone has to be careful regardless of what kind of job you're applying, because it is becoming very risky to apply for jobs, because individuals know that scammers feel you are already vulnerable, so they have a kind of upper hand on you. And the second point is that I wanted to show this because it's well written article and compare it with how an entry level scam might look like. So I'll give you an parallel example so that you can relate to it much better. Okay, so just to give you background on what's going on in this article. So there were a couple of journalists back in, I would say, a couple of 1 year or so back, where these journalists got a lot of high profile offers, especially from Harvard education. That was a common, like a Harvard University. They got an offer saying we invite you to become either a professor there or conduct a workshop or those kind of things. And the way the scam operated was somebody reached out to them either on social media or through email communication saying they are shortlisted because they are talented. So if you go back to our ways they try to approach you, the social engineering, they were using a tactic where they were trying to please their egos by saying, oh, you are a great person, you are an expert in this field, and we would like to give you more opportunities, right? And so they pretended to be someone from Harvard University. They reached out to, so this interview covers multiple individuals who experienced the scam, all of them journalists in some form or the other. And all of them experienced either or both of those category of issues that I explained. Either they had financial fraud or they had information related fraud. And I wanted to quickly go through a couple of highlights to show you how this happens in real time, right? So, for example, in the approach phase, where how these individuals kind of reach out to you, you see that this person, who is Mrs. Singh, who is also a journalist, received a Twitter message from someone calling himself Tausif Ahmed, who said he was master's student at Harvard Kennedy School, which is again one of the schools within Harvard University. And he was essentially inviting her to participate in a high-powered media conference, and that Harvard would pick all of these expenses. And so it went from there. And an interesting thing which Mrs. Singh saw later on was that this email was initiated from a personal email account. And that's super important to know, because if she had figured out that this was happening, the communication was coming from a personal Gmail account rather than @harvard.edu. As I mentioned before, if the email address was coming from a legitimate Harvard website, it would, or someone who is employed at Harvard. Let's go to Harvard website. It will come from an email which says, XYZ person at harvard.edu. But instead, she got an email from Gmail @gmail.com. So that means it's a very high likelihood that that is a scam email, right? So that's one instance. Let's look at another example. This example is with Miss Sikandar, again a journalist who was chatting with the same fraudster who reached out this time on WhatsApp instant messages and calling up. And she was one of the red flags that came out was that the phone number this person was using was from a UAE when they were claiming that they were from a Harvard University. Because Harvard, if you are from Harvard University, you will have an ISD number which is US based, not UAE based. And so that gave, I think, in this case, that triggered her doubt that, okay, this might not be legitimate. And these are the small kind of things that you have to be extremely careful about. You need to constantly search for these. Is this person suspicious of something because of something that you see, right? And what she then did was she went and kind of searched for Harvard students directory to make sure that this person says who he is. So what I'm guessing is she went to this website, depending on where that person was. So if that person said he's in Harvard Medical School, you or that person actually has gone and looked at every university will have something called as their directory of students. Just to show you an example, this is a website of Harvard's computer science, for instance. And imagine the student who reached out to her said he or she is from Harvard computer science. And what I think she did was she came to this website, she looked at people and searched for that person here. And she realized that that person doesn't exist. And that again triggered that alarm. And all this is to say that if you receive a similar application request from someone claiming to be an employee at one particular company, make sure you do a proper research on them and the companies that they're belonging to. And in your case, it can be looking closely at these individuals' LinkedIn profile, making sure the way they're communicating matches their credentials. So, for example, as somebody who has done MBA from IIM Bangalore will not have a lot of they will speak good English and their English will not be broken, completely seem as if it's not someone written from someone who has IIM or MBA degree. So these are small things, but we should keep a close eye on it. The other example, which I feel I wanted to show you as a last instance, is what is the length to which these scammers go to make you feel that something is original, right? And for that, I wanted to show you one particular example where they mention, this one. So the scammers were taking bolder steps in this case to impersonate Howard, and how they did it. They bought a website from GoDaddy. GoDaddy is essentially a marketplace where you can go and buy a domain name, like you can say iloveindia.com, and then start a website. It's very easy. It's all you need is like a credit card or something like that. And then they created, you can see how clever they are. They created something like harvardcareer.com, which is very similar to Harvard actual website, but is not exactly. So if you see actual Harvard website is this one, right? So this is for example, computer science school. So you have harvard.edu, not harvard.com. And most of the education websites, for instance, will never use .com. They will always use .edu to show that they are .educational website. And if you are not paying close attention, and if you were that person, you could easily see, some email is coming from XYZ at harvardcareer.com, so it might be legitimate. But if you look at if you take a closer look, and probably if you go, I don't know if this website is still up. I don't think so. It's not there. But these websites can also have a legitimate, exactly same design on there to just make it more realistic. So make sure that you have multiple ways on how you are checking particular information, not just one particular step, but 2 to 3 steps that you take to make sure that they are legitimate. So I think as an ending remark, I would say that I know this is very sophisticated, targeting sophisticated journalists, but the patterns that they are using will be very similar for even entry-level job scams. Creating fake websites, creating fake job ads, creating fake emails, which look very similar to the legitimate email, but are different because they have @gmail.com or something like that, are very small but important things that you have to keep in mind while you're applying and searching for these jobs.
Thank you so much, Aditya, for sharing that example. I think it gives us an insight about what extent to which these scams can actually go till, and it helps us understand what we can do to protect ourselves. I hope you enjoyed this informative conversation about job scams. If you have any questions, feel free to leave it in the comment section, and do write to us about any topics that you'd like for us to cover on this channel, and do subscribe to us. Thank you for watching Rozgar Radio. See you next time.